Thanks for pressing play on another Dolphins podcast, and welcome into part one of our free agent primer. I have Kat and Josh with me today to highlight some of the key soon-to-be free agents, and later on we'll even have a little discussion about who Miami should be eyeing with pick 13. But before we get to all that, the Dolphins enter the offseason $12 million over the salary cap. Gentlemen, do we need to enter this offseason as it's cap-apocalypse 2.0 after last year's doom and gloom?
To be honest, free agency, looking at the Dolphins roster, should be pretty different from previous seasons. I mean, I think we were even a little surprised last year when they came out of the gate with like a Jordan Brooks and a Jonnu Smith really quickly right out of the gate. I don't expect that to happen this year. I expect them to lose more of their free agents, including Javon Holland. Hopefully they can retain a couple of guys. But it's going to be Dolphins fans have to prepare themselves because it's going to be a different free agent. It's going to be a different free agency than the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think I don't want to call it the cap apocalypse or whatever, but we're pretty close to that, right? And this is why those guys get paid the big money. They got to figure out how to restructure some of these deals. They got to figure out how to build a team. I mean, on paper, these last few years has been absolutely. We were all very excited heading into the year. They got to figure out a way to get this thing back on track and rework some of those deals and find a way to keep some of the players they want to keep. So, not envious of anybody that has to make those decisions.
And we'll dive into how Miami can move around some money later in a later show. That's why we're breaking this down into a couple different parts. But keep in mind, last year the Dolphins started free agency started the new year, $40 million over the salary cap. And then there was some COVID money. And then there were some obvious triggers that the Dolphins could pull, whether it's the Tua contract, Jalen Waddle contract. They restructured Jalen Ramsey. I think Armstead was restructured. So you're running out of options here where you got to have one free agent 1 year, one free agency where you really don't have those impactful guys coming in. So, Kat, I want to start here. PFF released their top 100 free agents, and I see right at the top, Javon Holland is listed as number 3. Is this a scenario? How do you think this goes out? Because part of me wants to be a salty Dolphins fan and say this is like when Pittsburgh let Mike Wallace walk. We knew there were some high moments, but overall we kind of saw him take a step back. Or do you think that this is someone who still has a lot ahead of him, obviously over only 24 years old, gotten better almost every other year? Is it just one of those scenarios that just got to go in a different direction?
Him being 24 years old and having several good seasons under his belt, as well as being a former near first round pick, is going to earn Javon Holland a lot of money. I think the NFL will blame the Dolphins more than Javon Holland when he hits the market. And I expect him to get $15 million a year. I'm not saying I agree with that, but he is coming off his worst season. But I think when everybody in the NFL takes a step back, he's going to end up going to a team that's going to pay him that amount of money. It wouldn't surprise me if that team ends up being the Vikings and Brian Flores.
Yeah, that's a good point there with Flores. I think the most interesting thing is he was the number 1 rated PFF free agent midseason. Now he dropped down to 3. I mean, either way, I think like Kat said, he's going to make that money. And I think even in the Pro Football Focus little blurb, it even mentioned, he had a down season this year, but those other years before that were so, they don't look too much on that 2024 season. So, a little bit intrigued to see where he goes, but Brian Flores and the Vikings, I could definitely see that.
The Dolphins need to do some things at safety, right? You have to assume someone like Jordan Poyer isn't going to be back. Josh, or Kat, this is something we've spoken about quite a bit. Is this the offseason when you think that you have to overhaul a lot of this room safety? Are we talking Jalen Ramsey into safety a little bit more this offseason, a little more in the slot, just kind of patrolling the middle of the field?
I think we're still at least 1 year away from Jalen Ramsey moving to safety. I think he'll stay a cornerback. And, in this defense with Anthony Weaver and with Anthony Weaver coming back, I see this secondary being pretty simplistic as far as how it uses safeties. And I think that kind of hurt Javon Holland sometimes.
Interesting.
Where he couldn't, the Dolphins weren't rotating back and forth from the 1 high and 2 high safety looks like they were under Brian Flores and under Boyer. it was different last year, and I think it kind of put Javon Holland in a box. He played poorly, there's no doubt about that, but it lends itself to overall, I don't think he's a great fit for this defense. The good side of that is, safety is not a very high-paying position in free agency. So I could see, Jordan Poyer's gone, and I think Javon Holland is gone too, and I think you're going to see two new safeties for the Dolphins, and I think two safeties that aren't going to be making a whole lot of money either.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The guy that keeps sticking out to me is it how do you pronounce the safety from the 49ers? Hufanga? Something like that? I mean,
yeah.
I keep seeing that name being linked to them, but you're right. The Dolphins absolutely have to revamp that safety position, and they can't just do it in the draft, right? They have to bring in some veterans in free agency. So I want to see the way they rebuild this thing because, like you mentioned, Kat, it wasn't the same last season.
Yeah, and I think even Hufanga is going to get paid a lot of money. I think he's just very simply because he's coming up on his second contract. It reminds me, this probably 20 years ago, but like when the Dolphins in Nick Saban's first year, they overhauled the safety position and they signed Tabucky Jones and Travaris Tillman. Just two dudes, weren't great at anything, but they were professionals. They were middle of the pack safeties, and they overall did their job. Lance Shelters, I think they also signed. So I expect the Dolphins to go veteran heavy at safety for $2, $3, $4 million a year to whoever they pay.
That's the Deshaun Elliott contract right there. And that kind of makes you a little salty when you consider someone like him joined the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 years, $6 million. That's exactly what the Miami Dolphins are going to be looking for. And Jalen Ramsey, I keep bringing up the idea of moving him to safety, mostly because Javon Holland, 80% of snaps, Jordan Poyer, 90% of snaps, just having some sort of continuity back there. But he has continued to be one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL, so I'm not entirely for that. And I do wonder if the way this Miami Dolphins defense starts to come together, if you try to entertain the idea of keeping someone like Bradley Chubb around and you can entertain how good that pass rush can be, maybe you're thinking if we can get one thing for this defense, maybe it's a linebacker, and you're just hoping that the talent, all up front can kind of ignore what the Dolphins are working with or trying to work with at safety.
It's very possible Ramsey does move to safety, but that might depend on the draft. Right where the Dolphins are picking in the draft, at number 13, it'll be interesting to see if someone like a Will Johnson from Michigan falls to that spot. If he does because of his injury, maybe you see that process being sped up a little bit. Maybe, there are a lot of different things that could be done. But Will Johnson right now would be that value pick at 13 if the Dolphins were to go cornerback.
And you do bring up a good point, Jake, because when you have those pass rushers up front, you got Bradley Chubb, Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips, they're healthy, they're pinning their ears back, going after their quarterback. That definitely makes the secondary their job a little bit easier. So we're going to keep saying Jalen Ramsey's going to switch to safety until it eventually happens.
Looking at the PFF top 100 list, like right when you're like sitting back, you're getting your cup of coffee and you're getting comfortable in your seat, like you don't need to scroll too far. Pick number 91 right at the top, Tyrell Dodson, who joined the Miami Dolphins. There's a lot of musical chairs happening at linebacker. Obviously, you move on from David Long Jr. in the middle of the year, who was a team captain. Dodson comes in, has 3 interceptions, plays 251 snaps. Would that be a linebacker duo you'd be okay with as your starters? I think you could have another conversation. Hey, we bring in a 3rd-round pick. We kind of play around with the depth. But would you be able to stomach Dodson and Brooks as your 1A, 1B at linebacker next year, Cap?
Yeah, I definitely think Dodson is somebody the Dolphins should bring back, and I don't expect him to cost very much either. A guy who is really oddly cut in the middle of the year. And the Dolphins picked him up, and there was a lot of good and there was a lot of bad from Dodson, but I think we saw the range, especially in pass defense. And in this type of defense where, Anthony Weaver has 2 inside linebackers on the field all the time, Jordan Brooks had a fantastic year for the Dolphins. I'm glad that they signed him. But also Tyrell Dodson, if he shows that same ability in pass coverage, you could keep both of those guys on the field at the same time. And more importantly, you don't have to spend a draft resource to pair with Jordan Brooks.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I could joke that Channing Tindall, I'd like to see him eventually, get any sort of playing time. But I think what Tyrell Dodson did, he led the team in interceptions right after joining midseason. And alongside Jordan Brooks, they look like a nice tandem. So I'd be okay running it back. Like Kat said, hopefully he's not going to, he should not, cost a fortune in free agency. But bringing him back, that would definitely help the middle of that Dolphins defense for sure.
Ket, do you have like a list of names here? Sorry to put you on the spot of guys you're like, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind they're not coming back. I think Holland definitely goes in that category. Just when you listen to the way both sides talk, it's like, yeah, we tried, but we'll just kind of see what happens. Is there anybody else that just kind of pops right off the page? Like, yeah, I think we're going to have to, try to figure out a way without him.
I mean, there are a couple of guys. I mean, Javon Holland is certainly one of them. Kendall Lamb should retire. Liam Eichenberg, I think, has overstayed his welcome, but how much money is he really going to command out there, and can he be brought back as a decent depth piece? I'd say too, Jordan Poyer's gone. Isaiah Wynn, I'd say you flip a coin whether he even plays football next year, and the other guys are not really worth talking about that much. I mean, talking about like Jackson Carman, Dwayne Eskridge.
If you had to pick one, this is going to be so ugly to say out loud, but if you had to pick one, who would you like to have back? Robert Jones or Liam Eichenberg? Both played over 90% of snaps, 26, 27 years old. Both cost right around $2 million.
I'd go with Jones. I mean, I think Jones has at least shown the ability to be a middle-of-the-pack guard. Eichenberg did for maybe a 5-game stretch, but overall has been terrible. And yeah, I don't foresee any way I ever feel comfortable with Eichenberg being a starting guard for this team. I mean, if you're lining up week 1 and Liam Eichenberg is your starting guard again, then it's clear that Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel just don't get it.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking when we were talking about Eichenberg, he's like the perfect Jesse Davis at 6th offensive lineman, but you're asking me which one I would actually want to see starting in the lineup. I'd have to go with Robert Jones. I mean, yeet Liam Eichenberg into the sun. We've seen enough of him here in Miami.
He'll sign with the Packers. He'll start like one game at center, and then everyone will be like, I can't believe we let Liam Eichenberg go. That's just kind of how it goes here. Number 53 on the PFF list, Calais Campbell. This is going to be one that everyone's going to be watching all season long. We all saw the clips of him and Zach Sealer kind of having a moment following that Jets game, and all I can think is I'd love to see those two back together again. But Kat, overall at the defensive tackle unit, obviously Calais Campbell was a stout guy in the middle of the defense, but Benito Jones, I thought he played decently well. 45% of snaps, cost less than $2 million. Deshaun Hand, another guy, 53% of snaps, 30 years old, $1.3 million. He's a guy who I thought made a true name for himself. So what do you do at this position?
This is the position where I say that you gather all your acorns up and you re-sign all these guys because, look, they're not going to cost a lot of money. Now, Calais Campbell, I think he's just saying nice things at this point. At nearly 40, I think he really does want to go play for a team like the Ravens, someone who really is going to compete for a Super Bowl.
Serious people.
Yeah, serious football teams. I'd love to have him back if he's willing to come back. I mean, 100%. Even if he only plays, a fraction of the snaps. But in addition to that, I thought Benito Jones was okay, given the dollar amount. I thought Deshaun Hand continued to get better in this defense. I'd love to have him back too. And most importantly, if you can bring a few of these guys back for a couple of $1 million, maybe you don't have to spend a draft resource on the defensive line, which is going to be a top need if they don't get a few of these guys back.
Yeah, in the perfect world, we'd love to be that team on paper competing for a playoff or Super Bowl with Calais Campbell saying, okay, I'd love to come back, but I don't think that's realistic. I do like what Benito Jones has done. I think, Jake, you and I have always kind of been high on him, and I think what he did last year at that salary, I definitely think you can bring those guys back. So I'm with Kat, bring in as many acorns as you can and just, fill that spot right next to Zach Sealer because you can, let's be honest, Zach Sealer's a monster. You can probably put one of us next to him and we might have a little bit of success.
I never want to say never, but is defensive tackle a position the Dolphins should really be considering at 13? I understand that it can quickly become a need, but when you think about the urgency that's needed from this group, is defensive tackle, especially if you're bringing someone 23, 24 years old, when you've had these guys playing pretty well at 29, 30, is that a position the Dolphins can really bide their time if, that is their one like pure, if it's like a 3-point contest, it's their golden ball. It's their best opportunity this offseason. Is that something they can afford to use at defensive tackle?
as the board sits right now, and things could change a lot in the next 3 months, but Mason Graham from Michigan seems to be the only one that would be worthy of a top 13 pick at interior defensive line. And Graham, if you look at mock drafts, is pretty comfortably top 8 in just about every mock draft you see. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility he falls to 13, though, because when you take a look at the positions that tend to move up, like quarterback, like cornerback, edge rusher, maybe that forces somebody like Mason Graham, just a stout, solid, safe interior defensive lineman, maybe that forces him down the board, at which point he'd be a great value pick for the Dolphins. I mean, this is the same exact pick at 13 where they took Christian Wilkins back in 2019, and that turned out to be a really good pick for them.
Yeah, I'm with you. In the perfect world, Mason Graham would fall. I think Stephen Ross would be over the moon excited if he gets one of his Michigan boys, and I think what he could bring to this defense would be, it would be game-changing. So I think that would be that one player, Jake, where if he were to some reason fall, or the Dolphins, I don't necessarily think they would trade up for a defensive tackle, but you know what I mean. I think he'd be that one player that you could fit in there and could truly change that defense up front, Mason Graham.
Interesting. Kat, what do you think happens at edge rusher? I think that's one of the positions that I think you have a strong majority of the fan base, and understandably so saying like Bradley Chubb, maybe someone we can move on from. Him, I thought Tyus Bowser, somebody who's hopped around the league. I think he was on Baltimore's practice squad when he signed him. When he was healthy, he was playing pretty well. Jalen Phillips, he's coming off an ACL injury. What on earth are you doing at that position?
I mean, having Jalen Phillips coming back, hopefully he's able to stay healthy this year. Hopefully he has a monster year. This is his final year with the Dolphins under contract. And having him and Chop Robinson, I think if they're both healthy, is a fantastic young combo. I still hold out a lot of hope that Jalen Phillips is here long term.
Me too.
And other than that, it's just been patchwork together. Shaq Barrett retires before the season. Emmanuel Ogba's a free agent, and he was not terrible, but not all that good last year, and I think he's kind of overstayed his welcome too. Tyus Bowser was fine, but he's an example of the type of veteran player you're going to go sign out of desperation. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fascinating at edge. I don't think they should be looking at edge at pick 13, even though the value might be at edge rusher at pick 13 in this type of draft.
Do you think Chubb's on the roster week 1?
No. And I'm in favor of cutting as much of this roster as possible. I mean, look.
I understand that completely.
And it's not I'm mad, I'm bitter, tear it all down type of situation. But what do you bringing a lot of these guys back for? Bradley Chubb's going to be 29 next year. He's going to be coming off, almost 2 full calendar years without playing football. Unfortunately, just because of the timing of when he got hurt. But Chubb, Tyreek Hill, Teron Armstead, Javon Holland. I want to see the Dolphins start to move on from these players, shake that locker room up, and get a younger, hungrier group in here, and see what the core of this team, like Tua, like Jalen Waddle, like Devon Achane, see what these guys are made out of. Not bring back these guys, these veteran players who don't want to be here anymore for another year, so that they can try to piece together a season where they win 7 or 8 football games.
As for the edge position, 2 guys that it looks like a restricted free agent would be Quentin Bell. You guys have no issue bringing him back? I mean, I thought he played decent,
fine.
Right?
Yeah.
Bring him back.
Cameron Good, another one So those are 2 guys that I had to make sure we brought up. But I think I agree with Kat. I don't know that I'd really force the pick at 13 to get an edge rusher, but there could be some elite talent that falls into their lap. But I don't think the Dolphins necessarily need it. I am intrigued by you saying Bradley Chubb won't be on the roster, because I don't know why. I thought kind of the Dolphins might just max it out this season, but I can understand why.
Kat, we haven't had you on in a while. I want to talk about the Tyreek Hill situation, and I want to get your thoughts on just the process and where this offense is going. Yahoo Sports, Nate Tice, he had a great chart here where it kind of was breaking down how many NFL drives there are per game for a team in the NFL. So back in 2012, there was eclipsing 25 drives per game per team. Kind of talks to either turnovers, big plays. That started to spike again, but it was still only like 23 drives in 2023. But that plummeted in 2024, where you're talking about 20 drives per game. That's a difference of 7 drives. And when you consider this Dolphins offense, what made them good for a couple years, big plays, home runs. If you move on from Tyreek Hill, you bring in maybe another possession guy, you become that dink and dunk, that process, hold on to the football, everything changes. But what would you need to get in return for Tyreek Hill in order to stomach it?
Anything. I mean, seriously, a 7th round pick would do it for me. I mean, and I'm saying that because if you trade Tyreek Hill, yeah, you're going to be eating $28 million in cap this year. But once you get that off the books next year, you're going to get $52 million back. Okay.
Facts.
So, and look, what Tyreek Hill said after the Jets loss, he meant. Like, I don't care what his agent said. I don't care what he says. The guy's a moron. Get him out of the locker room. He doesn't want to be here. He's got to be 31 next year. He's got to keep getting worse. And I do think he has a little bit of value. Maybe, a team like the Chargers or a team that's just one weapon away is willing to fork over a 4th round pick. But the major thing is getting him out of the locker room and getting the salary off the books.
I was gonna say I hope a 3rd, but a 7 anything. I'm good with that. Yeah.
Hunter Long, maybe you get Hunter Long for him. Something like that.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in just the forward thinking of it's 1 year. And we actually had someone go onto the YouTube. Holy crap, I sound old. But they posted the comment on 560 WQAM, the YouTube channel that we post the podcast on. And he kind of asked us, why are we blaming Tyreek Hill? There's a lot of people who quit. There are a lot of people who underperformed. The thing about Tyreek Hill is he is the highest paid player on the team. He is also the loudest player on the team. Those things do not go together. There's a lack of professionalism. And as fans of this football team that we've all spent money on, that bothers me more than anything. So I don't know how else we can explain that other than that, hey, this guy got paid more than anybody else and took us all for a ride and made us all look like clowns. And we're still sitting here 25 years later without a playoff game. Kat, I know you said you're not bitter. I clearly
Oh, I'm bitter, but I'm not letting that drive what I'm saying here. I've had time to think and digest this and how I feel about Tyreek Hill, who is obviously a phenomenal football player.
Absolutely.
But there's something else going on with this team, and we saw that days after the season, where there is a lack of accountability on this team, and I think the atmosphere of the team involves older, overpaid players who aside from the Calais Campbells of the world, guys like Tyreek Hill, and I didn't like what Jalen Ramsey posted after the game either. You know, that where. Hey, I'm set for life. I'm in my 30s. Football kind of hurts now. And a lot of these guys have Super Bowl rings or have been deep into playoff runs before. So I want to get a younger group here to see, if for nothing else, what Tua and what Mike McDaniel are made out of, to see if they should be here for one more year or they should be here for the next 5 or 10.
How about throw a name out there, Jeff Wilson? What on earth happened there? Why couldn't the Dolphins run the ball up the middle? Cat, 0% chance he's coming back, safe to say?
0%. And I don't know what happened there. I mean, the one thing would be fascinating, which is a conversation for another day, is, I mean, everybody picking anywhere from 6 to 25 in the NFL draft is looking at Ashton Genty. And if you look at what Devon Achane contributed as a receiver last year, catching 70-plus passes, showing on a few plays legitimate wide receiver ability. If you want to change the dynamic of your offense, is Ashton Genty somebody that you want to draft and keep him and Devon Achane on the field at the same time? Not something I would do, but it's going to be fascinating to see, given that we know Tua, we know Waddle, and we know Achane are going to be here. Is Tyreek Hill going to be back, or are you going to trade him and get a different component on this team?
Yeah, I think we agree Jeff Wilson's gone, but that's intriguing to hear about Ashton Genty and how you could understand the Dolphins, maybe wanting to change that offense and what it could bring to this team. But I think the Dolphins will probably they won't be the team that takes Genty. I think he might even go earlier than that, right? Isn't the Cowboys where he's completely mocked every single draft?
Yeah, Cowboys are going to be definitely a consideration. I mean, anyone picking, between pick 6 and 25, like I said, I think is going to be really tempted to take Genty. That's going to be the story of the draft, because also, again, conversation for another day, but it's also a deep running back class too. So that'll also factor into draft day dynamics here.
Everyone's saying the Dolphins need an X wide receiver, but that'd be like a true X running back. I think that would actually be a lot of fun, and I think it'd make a lot of sense with Achane and just getting this team to do a lot of different things. We'll do some rapid fire, some names here real quick. I don't think there needs to be much debate. He's a restricted free agent. Kader Kohu, I think we should expect him back next year.
Definitely.
How about someone like River Craycraft?
I'm kind of done with Craycraft.
Yeah,
whatever.
either way.
I mean, if so many people drool over him, and then he has one catch for 6 yards every 3 games. I don't quite get it.
And then he gets hurt. Didn't he have a nice catch in preseason? And then he got hurt, and we didn't see him.
Yeah, he
for
like popped
6 or
his
8
shoulder
weeks.
out. He made a sickest catch, and his shoulder was
That's
terrible.
That's so Dolphins.
If you want to bring him back on minimum salary as a 4th, 5th receiver, that's fine. But yeah, a lot of these guys are kind of like that. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if I wouldn't cry if like Taj Washington comes back next year and he beats out River Craycraft. Just someone like Cat kind of speaks to the idea of like younger, hungrier. Like I think there are some guys like Saran Neal, like guys who are paid and just were a complete disaster for the Miami Dolphins when you could have had like a 6th-round Patrick Morris. I know he started the year on injured reserve, but just these guys who are a little more hungry, maybe a little smarter too out there. Elijah Campbell, someone you guys would bring back, especially with the lack of safety depth, or is that another one? It's kind of the purge.
I like him a little more. I thought he was always underrated as a safety, and he's a really good special teamer. So it's a yes for me to bring back for a couple million a year.
Yeah, I was going to mention the special teams because that's the real big thing. But he is starting to, you see him make some plays at safety as well. So, yeah, sign me up for Elijah Campbell.
Dwayne Eskridge, Anthony Schwartz, or Grant Dubois. Is any of them coming back? I kind of think Grant Dubois might come back now that I say that.
For some reason, McDaniel likes him. I can't get over him torpedoing the Bills game when it's 3rd and 14 and Tua throws a dime and he's not looking at the ball, which is your only job. So, no, I don't think I can get over that. So, no thanks. D. Eskridge, I thought, showed some ability. He'd be the one I'd most likely want to have back.
You brought up Taj Washington, so that's the only receiver I'm thinking of now. So I'd get rid of all these guys.
Is the 2025 backup quarterback already on the roster?
I say no because there's so much heat around what happened when Tua went down. I'm not against Tyler Huntley, re-signing Tyler Huntley. I think there's a little something there, not specifically as a backup, but the guy, was picked up off the street and thrown into the starting lineup. I mean, I'm interested to see what would happen on a cheap contract with an offseason with the team, but I also, too, when you take a look at the amount of picks the Dolphins have compared to previous years, I think they're going to have 10 picks when it's all said and done. With the compensatory picks, you better come away with a quarterback at least in the first 5 rounds.
Yeah, they got to do better than Tyler Huntley. But I liked what Huntley did at times. So it'd be a fine QB3, right? But they definitely got to find a QB2 that can step up when Tua Tagovailoa gets hurt.
The Super Bowl hasn't happened yet, but it hasn't stopped people from diving into the mock draft season. Kat, has there been a mock draft for you or one that you've done where it just kind of jumped off the page, somebody you've seen fall to 13 where you're like, that's the guy that I think would be a great fit for the Dolphins?
I think there's going to be a player of value that falls to 13. That's the exact right place in the draft where the guys that you thought were going to go in the top 7 or 8 picks fall to 13. I mean, we've seen that in the past. Christian Wilkins, he fell maybe a little bit further than where he was supposed to when the Dolphins picked 13th. Laramie Tunzel, that was a whole different situation.
I was going to say somebody else who fell to 13.
But I look at some of these guys like you take a look at the consensus top 2 offensive tackles in the draft. Will Campbell from LSU and Kelvin Banks from Texas. Most of them you'll see them off the board in the first 12 picks, but there's some concern with both of them. Are they real premier left tackles? Do they have that length? Do they have that long-term potential? Or do they have to kick inside to guard? I think that'll be a discussion, and I'll predict, too, that either Kelvin Banks or Will Campbell, one of the two, will be there at pick number 13 for the Dolphins. And I could see that being a day 1 left guard for them.
Yeah, I think that's kind of you mentioned it. We're in the right scenario where an elite player or an elite talent prospect is going to fall into their lap. I mean, I'd be intrigued to see which of those offensive linemen, because I do think that's where the Dolphins have to go, right? We need to build the trenches. I don't care who it is. Just bring somebody in there.
Daniel Jeremiah, in his first mock draft, he actually had the Dolphins going with Kelvin Banks. And I did a little research. This was from ESPN's Dave Wilson. He was the anchor of a much improved offensive line after Steve Sarkisian set out in search of quote unquote big humans. And guys, I just think back to that Cowboys game a couple of years ago where it was Jeff Wilson icing the clock. But I just remember almost every single play, it was Rob Hunt just getting up and pointing towards the first down. That physicality, that nastiness inside. I think Kelvin Banks could be that. And then if you want to have a conversation a couple of years, we're moving on from Austin Jackson. Maybe Patrick Paul wasn't everything we wanted. And then you could have a little flexibility there. However, another player who could be in consideration there, Bucky Brooks did a mock draft of his own. And he actually had the Dolphins taking a certified guard in Tyler Booker of Alabama. Kat, is that something you'd be able to stomach, the idea of something the Dolphins actually haven't done since 1982? And I'll tell you who it was in a minute, but take a guard at 13. Is that something you're fine with?
A pure guard, that's really high. I mean, Booker's a really good prospect. He's 6'5", 350 pounds. I think I'd be a little more bitter that the Dolphins didn't re-sign Robert Hunt a couple of years ago. I'm already upset about that, that they didn't re-sign him a year before he had free agency. To turn around and draft 13th overall a guard prospect that looks exactly like Robert Hunt, that would bother me. But Booker's a really good player. And, you know, if the Dolphins are going to change the identity of their team, I mean, how nice it would be, even though it would be a boring draft, if like they went with Kelvin Banks or Will Campbell 13th overall. And then because it's kind of a deeper year on the interior of this offensive line class, maybe come back with somebody like a Tyler Booker or a Donovan Jackson in the second round. Because I could see a player of value fall into that spot. And now you come back into 2025 and you've got a young, hungry offensive line that drives things.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we all want, right? And I'm sitting here saying how I'd take anybody on that offensive line, but I think I'm agreeing with Kat. I don't know that I wouldn't hate the pick, but I think I would understand if I would prefer them to go with the tackle that can play inside, can do things like that, than going for the guard there at 13, especially when we all wanted Robert Hunt back, and he's gone now.
Stop bringing up Robert Hunt. He just made his first Pro Bowl. He's making over $100 million. We're not bitter. We're not bitter whatsoever. So the only reason I like the idea of going with the idea of just somebody who can plug in, like if you could, let's put this in a fantasy world. Roy Foster was picked number 24th in the 1982 draft. He was the last first-round guard selected by the Dolphins. That said, he spent 9 years with the team and was a two-time Pro Bowler. Like, I know the idea of drafting a guard at 13 sounds like gross, but when you say 9-year career in Miami, and I think he actually played a few more years after Miami, two-time Pro Bowler. I mean, even going to like Mike Pouncey at 13, that was like the only center the Dolphins took. If you could pick someone and know that, hey, they're going to be here and they're locked in, I think that's something you got to strongly consider, just with the whiffs that can happen in a draft.
Yeah, it's always a back and forth because, I mean, like, for example, the Titans a few years ago, they drafted, I believe, 11th, and they took Peter Skoronski from Northwestern, who was a tackle, viewed as a solid, clean prospect, and they kicked him inside to left guard, and he's been okay. So that's what the Titans got, an okay left guard that didn't move the needle at pick number 11. So you could get a guy that you know, hey, look, let's just get good football players. That could be part of the mindset. But you could also say, hey, look, at cornerback, man, if Will Johnson from Michigan, if he didn't get hurt last year, could have been a top 5 pick. He gets hurt. Now he falls to 13. Now we could put him in a secondary with Kader Kohu and Jalen Ramsey, potentially Kendall Fuller. I mean,
that's a good point.
Those are all the conversations that are going to have to take place.
Kat's already preparing us for Chris Greer to take a cornerback. And I mean, I like Will Johnson, but I mean, we're already preparing ourselves for it, right?
I think, Chris Greer's been here for so long, and I don't want to have this be like a bash session. There's been good, there's been bad, but man, it's so foolish that they wanted to invest so much in the compensatory formula. When you have someone like Christian Wilkins there who goes out, he gets a new deal. I don't think anybody expected the Dolphins to match, but he was supposed to be a 3rd-round pick. Now it's a 4th-round pick. Greer's even come out and said, like, we stepped back in terms of the quarterback backup market just so we didn't mess with that formula and things like that. But man, would it be so great? Like, obviously you traded your 3rd round pick for Jalen Wright to have 2 more 3rd round picks to maybe move back up with that 2nd round pick, end of the 1st round, where you could get maybe a Tyler Booker if that premier cornerback or that premier player falls at the start of the 1st round. Man, that sounds like a dream, and just the Dolphins do such a great job at hindering their own flexibility. It's brutal.
Yeah, they've traded a lot of draft picks when they didn't have to. I mean, and look, I'll admit, when the Dolphins traded a future 3rd to draft Jalen Wright in the 4th, they actually kind of liked the move because I thought Wright fell further than he should have. But at the end of the day, you have a backup running back averaging 3.6 yards a carry. Is that worth a 3rd round pick? No. And not to mention he plays the same position as Devon Achane. So, I'm hopeful for Jalen Wright moving forward, but you look at them spending a 3rd rounder to move up for Liam Eichenberg a few years ago. You look at them spending a 1st rounder to move back up for Jalen Waddle when I didn't think that was necessary. Spending a 1st rounder on Bradley Chubb when you had Jalen Phillips and Andrew Van Ginkel on the roster. So many draft picks have been burned by Chris Greer. And I hope the Dolphins play the compensatory game and come away with 10 to 12 picks in each draft, like the Ravens do, like the Rams did this past year. And if you come away with 12 draft picks, you're going to whiff on most of them. But you come away with 3 or 4 good players every year. That's what I think the successful drafting teams do in the NFL.
Yeah, just throw as many darts against the wall and hope they stick, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're doing here. The one key thing with Chris Greer, and something that I know we like to bash him, but the one nice thing that he seems to do is kind of plug. He uses that, what is it, that little that boom, you know what I mean? The Flex Seal thing,
Flex Seal,
he patches. Yeah, is that what it was? He patches this roster, and he can almost allow us to go best player available if we have to in the draft. I'm trying to give Chris Greer some credit. I don't want to do that anymore.
Before we wrap up here, Kat, I don't know if we will be talking to you again. Super Bowl prediction.
I'm going to go Chiefs 27, Eagles 20. Look, as I've said probably on this podcast, my wife is a Chiefs fan. Her whole family are Chiefs fans. Every Sunday, just sunshine and rainbows. Every Sunday for the last 7 years we've been married. I mean, every year. This is the 7th time they've been in the AFC Championship game in a row. Every year we've been married, they've been in the AFC Championship game, and I haven't seen a Dolphins playoff win since before the Houston Texans even existed. I mean, life ain't fair, but we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to stay with this team because look, if the funniest thing are like after the Dolphins lost to the Jets, I saw, oh no, that's it for me. I'm done with this. Like, really? This was your breaking point? 8-9 was your breaking point after all the crap you've seen the last 25 years? I don't even know what I was talking about. I just went into I think I blacked out there for a minute. Anyway, Chiefs 27-20.
Do you want my prediction, Jake?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Man, we both predicted the Eagles to win the whole thing, right? I just don't know that that's really realistic. I'm in the same boat, Kat. My entire family, Eagles fans, wife's an Eagles fan. They have it made in the shade. I'll stick with it, though. I went Eagles at the beginning of it. I'll say Eagles, 34-31. I don't know that I actually believe that because it's Patrick Mahomes, but 34-31 Eagles.
Love it. Kat, it was great to have you back on the show. Josh, I know you're a little under the weather, so we appreciate you powering through. And everyone out there, thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. If I have one job for you all, it's going to go have a great weekend. And above all else, most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Loop.